So my project is on the viewpoint on development in the Galapagos. As a table of contents, I'm going to be first giving a brief introduction, then an overview of my entire project. Then I'll be talking about what biodiversity is and biodiversity hotspots. Then I'll be giving a brief relevant history, then talking about Ecuador and the Galapagos as a whole, and then going on to Isabella Island and San Cristobal Island, which were the two main islands that we stayed in the Galapagos. And then finally, I'll be giving a brief summary of my project. So as an introduction, my name is Kevin Lin. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I go to Staten Island Technical High School, where I'm in the class of 2015. I went to Ecuador and the Galapagos this June with a group called Global Leadership Adventures. It was a service trip focusing in conservation. So I went on the trip because I have a strong interest in environmental science, ecology, and conservation. These are actually fields that I'm probably going to be majoring in and hope to pursue a career in. I was especially attracted to this trip because it focuses on preserving turtle habitats in the Galapagos. It's very focused on conservation, which I like. So it was 13 days long from June 16th to the 29th, and we stayed in these very rustic, simple family-run hostels. And this is a picture of me in Quito, Ecuador. So the goal of my project is to look at the development in the Galapagos and consequently the loss of biodiversity from the vantage point of the residents and to find out what locals think of it. So biodiversity is defined as the variation of species, ecosystems, and genes within a region. A biodiversity hotspot is a region with significant amounts of biodiversity, but is actually under threat from humans. So there are 25 of such areas and 9 are candidates, and they support nearly 60% of the world's plant and animal species, the large majority of which are endemic species, endemic meaning unique to that area. And the Galapagos Islands is one of these hotspots. So this is a map showing the world's biodiversity hotspots. The green is the original hotspots, and the blue is the ones that are currently under consideration that are added onto the original. And so Ecuador and the Galapagos is circled in red, right here. So here's some things about Ecuador and the Galapagos. Ecuador actually has one of the highest deforestation rates in South America, and it's the country's most severe environmental problem. When you have deforestation, you're eliminating the habitat for many of the species that rely on the forest. And what this causes is habitat fragmentation, which is when you're isolating ecosystems from other ecosystems. And this causes a whole other array of issues, from things like low genetic variation to genetic drift, gene flow, and the bottleneck effect, which are all concepts in evolutionary biology, but basically they isolate populations, and that's never good. You want populations to be complete and one entity and not separated, because when you separate, you're isolating genes. And to solve fragmentation, what you would do is that normally conservationists, they build things called habitat corridors, which are essentially these bridges that are created and are planted between two isolated communities, and this bridge allows the animals and plants in the two ecosystems to sort of spread and migrate and share their gene pool. So in the highlands, almost all natural forest cover has disappeared, and now you only have private nature reserves that remain. 95 of western slope forests and lowlands have become agricultural lands, and that's a significant amount. So land rich in endemic species has now actually turned into banana plantations, because bananas are one of Ecuador's main exports. Many species are extinct before they're even identified. So the Amazon rainforest and even the Galapagos are such amazing biodiverse areas where there's so many species, many of which aren't even discovered yet and aren't even recognized yet, and they're becoming extinct before they're even formally identified. And so again, they're threatened with habitat fragmentation. So here's some relevant history about the islands. Tourism began in the 1960s but boomed at the beginning of the 90s because flocks of people were coming to the Galapagos because of the awesome biodiversity that it possesses. and it attracted hundreds of people because of salaries in the tourism industry, which is much higher than the money they can make in the mainland Ecuador. It became so disorganized that there were new rules for immigration that needed to be set to stop big crowds from moving to the Galapagos. And in 1998, there was a law which required travelers, national, meaning from Ecuador, or international, to be in the island as a visitor for a maximum of only 3 months. The people that got there up until 97 could stay legally. So many of the people that currently live in Galapagos have been staying there for quite some time now, since 1997, so that's about 16 years ago. So as a case study of overpopulation and human interference in the Galapagos, Puerto Ayora in Santa Cruz Island has become very overpopulated, resulting in a surge of invasive animals. Because when you have people from all over the world coming to one small location, you're bringing with them lots of invasive plants, invasive animals, and even things like diseases. So the Galapagos National Park, together with the Governing Council of Ecuador, has set new rules for making the situation much more difficult for those who plan to go to the island and stay there working. So now I'm going to be going into the two main islands that we're traveling with GLA. That's Isabela Island and San Cristobal Island. We stayed in Puerto Villamil in Isabela, which is the more developed part of Isabela. So there were these invasive dogs when we were just walking down the streets towards the beach. There were so many invasive dogs, and it was just crazy. None of them, we weren't even allowed to touch them because of the fact that they might have rabies or something if they're not domesticated dogs. And so they kept on following us and came up to us, which was a little frightening. So dogs aren't actually invasive on the islands. Many are not domesticated, and again, we were advised not to touch them. So we talked to a few residents who lived there with the dogs, and they told us that even though they consume native plants and animals, they are kept there because they stay outside and make excellent watchdogs. So there's a significant amount of development going on in Isabela Island, and here you could see this is like a surf shop a surf shop and a boutique, and this is, I think it's an ice cream shop, an ice cream shop. Oh, this is the housing project that was in Isabela Island. It costs 70,000 American dollars. Not quite sure what this is for, but it's a housing project or some type of building construction development. So restaurants, grocery stores, and souvenir shops line the roads on Isabela. Some store owners we talked to mentioned how that this was their only source of income and how they relied on the tourism industry and tourists like us for money, for income, because they would frequently go to the restaurants and stores and shops. Housing projects are also a concern for biodiversity conservation, but our group members who were traveling with us, we talked about it and we agreed that some of this development was necessary in order for the nation and for the islands to progress. There was also a luxury hotel on the boardwalk of the island called the Iguana Crossing, which I thought was very interesting. It was the only one of its kind. So it was quite contrary, to our family-run hostel, Hotel Santurita, which was definitely a surprise for us because we did not expect something like that over there. And so again, that's people in the Galapagos relying on the tourism industry for their income. And it's adjacent to sea lion habitats, which is not exactly the best location. San Cristobal Island was our next island. Oh, that circle is kind of off, but San Cristobal should be here. So here's a picture of us as we're just arriving at San Cristobal, and even right away you could see how this looks like a pretty touristy, developed part of San Cristobal. You see the little buildings, and this is a hostel. And it's a bustling port city. This part of San Cristobal is called Puerto Belcurioso Morena. Hope I said that right. But there are many ships over there, and they're usually water taxis bringing in tourists. So shops and restaurants line the boardwalk. Here you see lots of people and little grocery shops and restaurants and cafes and things like that. But sea lions have actually learned to coexist peacefully with humans. They just do their own little thing on the benches, on the boardwalk, and they don't mind the humans. So the island's capital is located on San Cristobal. It's Puerto Bacuriazo Moreno. Again, I hope I said that right. And so the main industries on San Cristobal are artisan farming, tourism, and arable farming. Patricia, our international director, said that Galapagos residents have actually changed their way of thinking. Initially, conservation was a big issue. Was not a big issue actually. Let's just say not a big issue, and people did not contribute too much to it, especially the people who moved in the 80s and 90s, as they were from more developed cities on the mainland, and they just wanted more development and more tourist attractions because that meant more revenue for them. It's been a long process to change people's way of thinking about conservation, but not everybody cooperates with the national park. People who live in Ecuador now and in the Galapagos now, they understand how important, how vital conservation is inherently, not just that biodiversity has important cultural aspects because it benefits humans, but how biodiversity is inherently important. So this is a different, it's like a collage of people's viewpoints on development and on biodiversity conservation. We saw this at a museum in San Cristobal. So this here says, the secret to living in the Galapagos is to love nature, which is essentially a perfect quote that sums up this entire thing. The secret to living in the Galapagos is to love nature, to appreciate nature. So in summary, development contributes to the rise in industry, which leads to revenue. However, it has disastrous effects on ecosystems and environments, often causing biodiversity loss. And so weighing the pros and cons of such development is extremely vital because you have to do sort of a cost-benefit analysis saying, is building this housing project over here more important than keeping the habitat for these sea lions or for these turtles? You have to see which is more valuable, how much money you're going to gain from the housing project, or how many jobs are you going to create from that, versus how many animals are you going to destroy, how many animal habitats are you going to destroy from building this. And so again, the secret to living in the Galapagos is to love nature. Many people who live in the Galapagos are now aware of the intrinsic value of biodiversity in nature, and now they actually work with government officials to preserve the islands. And again, cooperation is key. You have all these different parties, these conservationists, these political activists, these politicians, and then you have people who don't want the Galapagos to be preserved, and how they just want it to industrialize and develop completely and to make it a more profitable island. So you have to have cooperation and compromise between all parties in order to be successful. So that is my project. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys learned a lot. Thank you.